Do you trust your own intuition? Like, really trust your own intuition? Do you trust yourself and your decision-making skills? Or do you have to seek validation from someone else that you're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason? Today on Boldly Driven Conversations with Bree, we're going to talk about how our people-pleasing nature is actually killing our self-trust and our intuition and growing our self-doubt. So join me. Okay, so I've been thinking about this a lot. I am what I call a recovering people pleaser. This means that just like a alcoholic, I am still a people pleaser, but I'm recovering. I am someone who tries to not live my life for others' approval, which is what being a people pleaser is. But I still want the approval of others. And when I don't get it, it hurts. It sucks. But I'm learning to overcome it. This has been a many-year process, and sometimes it still sneaks up on me. And one of the ways that it oftentimes can sneak up on us is it can completely sabotage our self-worth and our value in ourselves and our self-trust. Trusting our intuition, trusting that we are making moves and doing the things and making decisions that are best for us based on other people's reactions. So yesterday I have a coach, I have a business coach, and yesterday we had a 2-hour mastermind call about my business and growing it. And let me tell you, this person is amazing. I love him deeply as a friend. I love him as someone who is so valuable to the industry. He knows what he's talking about, and he's absolutely fantastic. But he really challenged me, and I got into this place of, after our call, I was thinking about how I kind of had a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I kind of was like doubting myself after our call. And I know that's not what he meant to happen, but I realized that as I was talking through the call with a friend, that I was in people-pleasing mode, and I was hurt that I did not please him, that I did not have his approval of all the decisions that I had been making. And that's why I was kind of butthurt a little bit, like I was challenged, and it was really hard, and it made me feel like I couldn't trust my intuition about some things. And that's just not true. I can. At the same time, I value his input. I value exactly what he's telling me to do. It's amazing. But ultimately, we have to trust our own intuition on certain things. So let's talk about how the people-pleasing can sabotage us into not trusting ourselves, into not having self-trust. So oftentimes people pleasers specifically, we've talked about this many times. When we are people pleasing, we are not looking into our own needs, our own desires, our own values. We fear disappointing other people. And this oftentimes can lead to having a lack of self-worth and suppressing our emotions. So when we are suppressing our emotions or suppressing our needs and not, speaking out what it is we need from someone or an entity or whatever it is that we're people pleasing to, this causes us to feel like we are small. This will cause us to feel like we are not worthy of being, of our needs being taken care of. And oftentimes there's a lot of shadow work that goes along with people pleasing, which is what I do a lot with my clients. Shadow work is an integral part of the framework that I do with my clients in order to break through like people pleasing in order to live a bold life. And so some of this shadow work will bring up the triggers that we have and to why we actually people please. Because here's the thing, is that we're not born people pleasers. There are things that have happened to us, things that have been said to us, things that have been communicated to us, either verbally or Otherwise, that causes us to feel like we have to make decisions for others above ourselves and not prioritize ourselves. So we have to figure out what those triggers are. When we are not allowing our needs to be met, when we are not bringing up what those needs are, we have to figure out what is it that triggers me to feel this way, that I can't bring up my needs in order to have them fulfilled. We also will have a lot of negative self-talk. So we need to reframe that negative self-talk, and we need to challenge those feelings that we might have or thoughts that we have, and ask ourselves, is this based on fact or is this based on fear? That's a really great question of why we are not asking for our needs to be met, or why we feel like we can't bring up something to someone for whatever reason. And this is a question I ask myself a lot, is the way I'm feeling about the situation, person, whatever it is it based on fact or fear? If it's based on fear, then that is oftentimes the fear of disappointing someone else. So then I know that I'm going into people pleasing mode and I need to pull back, recalibrate, and then move forward boldly with prioritizing my needs, speaking what I need to someone, and defying those triggers and not allowing those triggers and those negative thoughts to control how I am approaching an issue, a person, a relationship, or even my own self and my own thought process and intuition, and self-trust, so that I'm not living in doubt. This also requires us to affirm ourselves. So not just ignoring the negative thoughts and questioning if it's fact or fear, but actually making sure that we are affirming ourselves, affirming our strengths, figuring out, what are my strengths? What is it that I am really good at? What are my talents? What are the unique things I bring to the table? And by listing these things, this will help us to then trust ourselves more, because when we know our strengths, we can say, well, I am basing this decision on this strength that I know that I have. And so it helps solidify our own self-worth and less self-doubt and more self-trust, listening to our intuition. The other aspect of this is having self-awareness. We have to, how do we do this? How do we overcome the self-doubt into more self-trust, especially as a people pleaser, is being aware. We have to be aware of when we're actually people pleasing. And again, that's where that question of, is this a fact or is this fear that am I basing this decision on what am I basing it on? We have to have awareness of it. And this requires of us to check in. We have to check in with ourselves. It means that we have to cultivate a life of more self-awareness. We have to, things that can help us with that are like journaling, meditation, just mindfulness practices in general, and being in that present moment, that mindfulness of being in now, understanding how we are feeling now, understanding what is going on around us now in this very moment, and how are we reacting to it. So it's about self-awareness. That self-awareness piece is a key to being able to identify when we are actual people pleasing, so that we can overcome it and not allow the people pleasing to make us doubt ourselves, so that we can trust our intuition more. After we have, focused on our strengths and had more self-awareness, another part of this, another aspect of this is then when we catch ourselves people pleasing, when we catch ourselves making decisions based on getting approval from someone else, that external validation, we have to make sure that we are giving ourselves compassion and not kick ourselves when we're, already down. Yesterday, when my business coach was challenging me on several things, I was kind of kicking myself during the call. He called me out very specifically on a couple of things, and it did not feel good. But here's the thing, it's not supposed to feel good. When you're doing this kind of coaching, it's not necessarily supposed to feel good. His whole point is to kick me out of my comfort zone and to challenge me. Like, this is the reason why I'm doing this with him. But there were moments where it felt icky, it felt I felt like, oh, I messed up. I'm disappointing him, I'm disappointing myself. And what has to happen is I have to give myself self-compassion. I have to be kind to myself, because here's the thing. I don't know what I don't know. And that's why I am working with him. And that is okay. Now I know. And he's brought awareness to an area that I am learning that is going to be imperfect. We've talked about, perfectionism absolutely goes along with people pleasing. When you are a people pleaser, you want to do everything perfect because you don't want to disappoint anybody. You don't want to disappoint yourself. And we feel like we can't trust ourselves if it's not perfect, if not everybody loves it, if it's not without mistakes. And that's just not true. And it's very easy to fall back into that. I recently did like a one-off video, just a raw video, sharing an aspect of my life of how in certain areas of my life, I'm starting to embody this lack of perfectionism. Like I'm embodying, accepting, and embracing the imperfect, and how it's so very freeing. And this allows people pleaser me to kind of go to the wayside and not be constantly thinking about how am I going to get validation for this thing that I'm doing, or, where that validation is going to come from, because the validation comes from within myself, in these certain aspects of my life. So, as a recovering people pleaser, we have to be kind to ourselves when we fall back into that people pleasing mindset of I disappointed them, or this isn't perfect. And how we do this is we have self-kindness. We talk kindly to ourselves as if we would talk kindly to someone else. My coach, one of the things that he talks a lot about is befriending self, befriending our own self. And this is so very true. If I would not speak to my best friend the way that I think and speak to myself, why am I speaking to myself that way? That's not befriending myself. That's not being kind to myself. And this perpetuates that self, the self not trusting self, and going forth and people pleasing in order to receive validation so that I can trust myself. And that's just not the way it works. Another thing we have to do is avoid that self-criticism. That kind of goes along with that. Being kind to ourselves is also avoiding heavy self-criticism. Now, yes, do we need to be real about our weaknesses, about areas that we need to improve? Absolutely. But we don't need to criticize ourselves in a way that makes us feel, well, I'm just a loser, or I'm dumb, I don't know anything, Why? We don't have to be so nitpicky on ourselves. Oh, I people pleased again. I'm such a terrible person. No, it's going to happen because we're imperfect. We're human, and we're on this journey of learning to prioritize ourselves and trusting ourselves. So we have to avoid that criticism. Yes, we take responsibility for our actions, but we avoid that heavy criticism ourselves. It's embracing the imperfect. We have to embrace the imperfect in order to be able to move forward, in order to be able to not try to people please and get that external validation from other people. And it's a huge part of it. We have to be able to say, this isn't perfect, this is wrong, I made a mistake. And then here's another key: learn from those mistakes. So when I got called out by my business coach, he called me out in some very specific ways about a couple of posts that I have been making on one of my social channels, and that I did it without a lack of intention. And I've learned from that I need to make sure that every single one of my posts are very intentional and that they are for my people. And so it was a good lesson. It was a really good lesson. And this lesson is going to help me trust myself more and use my intuition more so that I'm building my business in a way that aligns with my own values and structure. Okay, so another aspect of, that people pleasing and turning that self-doubt into, self-trust is setting realistic goals for ourselves. So within this whole business coaching, being with a business coach and building a coaching business for myself, teaching people how to break people pleasing, how to be bold in and of itself. I have to have realistic goals for myself. I have to build relationships in order to help me feel supported towards those goals. So that's why I talk to a lot of coaches. That's why so much of my time is in support of other coaches, learning from other coaches and learning how to do this thing in a way that is full of value, integrity, and helpful. I've been coaching for a very long time, but I've not had a business. So learning from other people is absolutely integral for me to be successful. But I have to set realistic goals for myself for the business, because I am on a learning journey of this learning curve of what it actually means to be coaching as a business. So I have to build relationships that are going to support me and that are going to support this business. And this means that there's active listening when we're building relationships and offering them support as well. It's an exchange of support for one another. And this helps us as people pleasers to be able to practice what we're preaching about breaking people pleasing, to offer support, but in a way that doesn't go negative towards me, where I'm not putting myself in a position where I'm hurting myself. So it's an actual embodying of getting the support needed and offering support and having my needs met and helping others, as a recovering people pleaser. And then I think the last thing is celebrating the successes. And this is really a key aspect of when you're people pleasing, of celebrating your successes inwardly and not celebrating them in a way that is completely based on other people's external validation. So we learn to, celebrate our successes within ourselves. That doesn't mean we don't share about them and we don't talk to people about them, but it has to be this internal success of knowing we are actually doing the thing. And that's this journey I've been on with building this business. Every little win, every little time I feel like, oh yeah, I'm moving towards the target, the goal that I have for myself, is a good thing, is a healthy thing. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with money, which, when you're building a business, it's about the revenue, right? That's why you're doing the business, to bring in revenue. It's oftentimes for me that I'm learning right now as I'm at the, this foundational portion of building this business still. It's knowing that I'm making choices based on my values and integrity, for the future of my business, rather than people pleasing and getting that external validation and showing, yeah, like I made all this money, look at how successful my business is. It's not about that. It's about living from the values, the long term. So we can apply that into all different realms of our own lives, of applying, how do I apply that thought process? Sometimes it's not about you reaching the goal, the destination, but the actual journey with how you are actually journeying to get to that destination, to get to that goal. Sometimes the celebration is about how we got there. Did we get there in the integrity? Did we get there in a way that we fulfilled, that we followed our value system? That is success. That requires us to celebrate our success. Okay, so I always ask you guys some questions. Here are some questions we can ask ourselves if we are to know if we are living in our self-trust and not people-pleasing, or if we're living in self-doubt. There's 3 questions that I ask myself quite often. Well, there's four. The first one is, I already mentioned, is when I'm having a negative thought and I realize this is negative, this is not getting me anywhere, I always ask myself, is this based on fact or is this based on fear? That is the first question I always ask myself, because it helps me to decide if I am actually making my decisions based on fear or if I'm basing my decisions on what I'm going to do moving forward on factual information. The second question is where is my validation coming from? When I am trying to have validation, when I need validation, because we all need validation. Validation is not a bad thing. But where is the primary source of my validation? Is it coming externally from other people and telling me, good job, Brianna? Or is it coming from that inward place where I can trust myself and say, good job, Brianna. You're doing the thing. What is the primary place that my validation is coming from, and where I want my validation to come from is really the question. Am I okay with the validation just being from within myself? Is it enough? Or do I need it from external? And having external validation and needing that is not wrong, because we all need external validation as well, but we don't want the bulk of our validation coming from others. It has to come from within ourselves. The third question is, do I take responsibility for my actions? This is a huge question. When we are making decisions, when we are doing things for ourselves, whether it's learning to put ourselves first and prioritizing our needs, are we going to take responsibility for our actions of doing that? Because we've talked about this many times. There are consequences, and consequences are not always bad. There are consequences for our actions. Are we willing to take responsibility? Do we take responsibility for our actions, for the good and the bad? You know, do I take responsibility for the good decisions that my intuition is leading me towards? I should, because that's going to be self-validating. That is going to teach me to be able to say, yeah, I can take responsibility. I made that choice, and look what happened. Conversely, when we make bad choices, or we do something imperfect, or we make a mistake, are we taking responsibility for that as well, so that we can learn from it, so that we can grow? And as people pleasers, oftentimes what happens is that the pendulum swings too far, and we end up taking responsibility for everybody's actions. And that is not healthy either. So it's finding that balance of, am I taking responsibility for my actions only, nobody else's actions, mine? That's the real question there, to know if we're people pleasing, or if we are learning to trust ourselves and we're not sabotaging our self-trust and living in self-doubt. And then the last question is very forward, very succinct. Do I trust my intuition? Do I actually trust myself? Do I actually trust myself? Or do I feel like I have to get everybody else's opinions before I make a decision and learn to do something that allows me to trust myself? So there's your questions, your bold challenge for today. Your bold challenge today, ask yourself these questions. And if you find yourself leaning more in like self-doubt, and you're not learning, you're not trusting yourself, you're not trusting your own intuition, ask yourself, am I making my decisions for other people and allowing other people's opinions to make decisions for me? You know, am I working out of fear and the approval of others? Or am I trusting myself to move forward? Hard questions. They're really hard questions. And the challenge is to share that with someone. Talk to someone about it. See if maybe they are too. Maybe you can become recovering people pleaser buddies. Okay, so also, if this was helpful for you at all, I would love for you to sign up for my newsletter, Unveiled and Revealed with Bree. I talk about people pleasing. I talk about self-sabotaging and trusting ourselves, living in the imperfect life boldly, unveiled and revealed. And I have a very special offer coming for my newsletter readers for a workshop that's coming up called Liberate, to help us move from people pleasing into liberating ourselves to move boldly into non-people pleasing, becoming that recovering people pleaser rather than the active people pleaser. So make sure you sign up for my newsletter. You can find it at BriannaLGeorge.com. It's the first thing that'll pop up at the top, and I really hope to see you there this week, because my special offer is coming out this weekend. All right, have a great